They always want somebody that's an O-lineman, but the coordinator, Cliff Kingsbury, Brian Johnson, DQ, I mean, everybody was just really pumped to get him. And we were holding our breath for a while, thinking he might go ahead of us. So we were thrilled when he was there. It was an easy pick for us to make, and we're really pumped that we had another commander in the building. So with that, fire away.
John?
John, what is it that jumped out at you? Why do you guys like him so much?
It's really the total package, John. I think first, you look at the tape and you see what an incredible athlete he is for his size, which is backed up by a lot of his testing numbers too, but just really the way he moves. Just great feet, great lower body structure, great bend, and it's just super talented for a big man. And then you start hearing about the type of person he is, just human being. And then you hear about the type of football person he is in terms of in the locker room, the leader, the worker, how routine oriented he is, how he's like a true pro already. And despite being really young, he's just 21. I think he's turning 21 in November. So he's still like a baby in terms of age wise, but he's very, very mature for his age. And so really throughout the process, it just kept getting more and more positive. And then we had him in for a 30 visit last week. He wasn't much of a golfer, but that's all right. He was, he just really, really impressed us in person, just the way he handled himself. Really, anybody we talked to, we debrief after those 30 visits, and you go around the room and talk about how each person interacted with him, and it was all superlatives. Probably, we had like 3 really, really special guys here, and he was one of them. And so really the whole process, it was just kind of all around pretty easy pick.
And then because you have Larry on the left side, how do you see Josh? Definitely right tackle, or can you play either spot, do you think? Right or guard?
Yeah, I think what's cool about our team and our program and how DQ coaches is it's competition, and iron sharpens iron. So I think probably the only one I can say, and we'll leave these up to the coaches, the only one I can say is LT is going to be on at LT, and then the rest of them, they'll compete for the rest of the spots, I think. So but to answer your question more specifically, he can't play guard and he can't play tackle. So he played both. He played a little right tackle in the Senior Bowl, and that's not totally foreign to him, and he's practiced at it. So whether it's left guard, right tackle, I don't think he'll be center, although I do think he could play center if we needed him to. That's probably what he'll compete at those spots.
Adam, you had talked about the possibility of trading back. When Conerly was there at 29, were you still taking calls? Was that still a discussion?
Yeah, we got a ton of calls, excuse me, when we're on the clock. We got calls throughout the week, just preliminary calls like we talked about earlier in the week in our presser. And then we got a ton of calls leading up to that. And what we had discussed beforehand is really if he was on the board, we weren't going to trade back. And so there's an opportunity to trade back with a few other teams. It wasn't very far, but in our minds, it was not worth even risking missing on him. So,
and then kind of your 3 biggest moves so far this offseason, Debo, Funsell, and now Conerly. How much are you guys trying to push your chips in towards protecting and maximizing Jaden Daniels?
I mean, I think, it's every move we make, we're trying to maximize him and really the whole team. So he was the highest player on our board. Is really what it ended up being. It wasn't really so much we needed to get an O-lineman or anything like that, but he was clearly the highest player on our board. So if it was a defensive player that was the highest player on our board, we would have done that.
Do you hear from Jaden at times like this? I mean, I realize it's almost midnight, but
he gets up real early. No, I didn't hear from him. We did call him though. We woke him up, and then he went back to bed. But no, he's happy.
I mean, I know you guys have talked about sort of this accelerated timeline, but to really invest in the line, to get Debo, I mean, is this just kind of reinforce that belief that you have that this team is maybe closer than perhaps some thought initially?
I think every year you're trying to win the championship. You're trying to win the whole thing. So we tried to do it last year. We're going to try to do it again this year. That's what we do this for. So I don't think we're, trying to accelerate anything. That's kind of, but we came in here with that mindset, and we'll continue to have that mindset while we're here.
What do you remember about Scanty's initial presentation?
He really stood on the table for him. We do like early in the season, we'll talk to all the scouts and who are their guys. And he said, "This is my guy." This is like, it was really early in the process too. Before I'd even seen him, I saw him in person at a game, and when they played Michigan, and I remember him saying that. So I was really, really interested in seeing him and seeing the way he moved in person. It was super impressive, but it wasn't so much, obviously he loved the player, but he just loved everything about him, just what he was about. I think, they're both from Seattle, so he probably had a little bias there too, but that's all right. But that also means he knows a lot about him. And so when you have a scout who's been in that area for a long time, which Paul has, he knows a lot about those players, especially the ones that are close to him geographically. So you always put more stock into that. And, just being a road scout that I was for a long time, you really start to, look around and see the other scouts, and they really know the guys, like where they live. And they just, that's just your job, right, is to know that. So you put a little more stock into that. So that really, gave us a lot of confidence early on.
You've had a lot of, I guess, just so far, top 100 picks that have been at the Senior Bowl. Is there something about that event or seeing those guys that, especially early on in the draft, make you say, hey, that's, something we want to target?
Not so much that's something you want to target, but I do think, myself and probably a lot of people, you're able to get more conviction on a player if you see him in person and you're around him more and you kind of understand. And it could be conviction either way. Conviction that you do really like him, or conviction that you don't like him as much for your team. So I do think that helps a lot, and all the touch points you have, I think, I believe in that. Not every team believes in that, and, to each their own. But for me personally, to, that helps quite a bit. So to see him at a game, to see him at the Senior Bowl, we interviewed him at the Combine, came on a 30 visit. So, all those things help.
Adam, obviously this is not between Laramie and Josh. You guys have made two pretty seismic moves on the offensive line. When for you did you just think, hey, this is an area we need to, you always need to improve the line again, but when did like, hey, we kind of need to do this? What kind of triggers was that for you to make look for these kinds of moves?
Well, I think each one is its own move. With Laramie, it was a chance to get an elite player at a really important position. And, we didn't know what we'd be able to get in the draft at that time. And so, that was one we were really, really behind. Everybody was behind that. And with this, it was, simply him being the highest player on the board. And so, and him having the versatility to play other positions made it, pretty easy to do that.
With him being the highest player on your board, maybe this doesn't matter, but the general sense of this draft was offensive tackles kind of dry up quick, and then the defensive ends and some other positions run a little bit deeper. Did that factor into the thought process of, hey, we want to jump here, we can maybe find these other positions later?
Yeah, you always look at that. I think that's a good question. And yeah, we did think that, after Josh, there was going to be a little bit of a dip in terms of the guys that we really liked. And it wasn't a huge dip, but you're right. You do look across the board and say, okay, we can get these guys later. That shouldn't be the driver of your decision, but it also makes for, you to feel more comfortable about doing that.
On that same topic, Adam, how much pressure do you now feel to switch to the defensive side of the ball tomorrow if you stick with that pick or turn it into more picks?
I think it's just looking at our board and picking the highest player on our board. So I don't think there's any pressure to pick defensive guys. I have to feel bad for Joe Witt a little bit, but he was extremely supportive of this pick too. He's a great team guy. All jokes aside, but no, there's no real pressure to do that, to force a pick on the defensive side of the ball. It's just trying to pick the best commander for us.
And then at LT's point in his career and being new here, how much do you expect him to kind of tutor the young guys, kindly included coming in here, or is his job just to focus on his job?
That's really up to him. And from what I understand, we, we haven't had a chance to practice with these guys yet, but with his reputation as a really good teammate and a really guy who will help the younger guys from back when he was in Houston, that was one of the things we really liked about him. So whether that's something he wants to do or not, that's up to him. But I do know he'll be a great teammate, and he's still one of the best, arguably the best left back on the game. So that's why we've got him.
Got time for 3 more.
Hey, Adam. So we've heard you and DQ mention, asking the guys about their why or what makes them tick. So how much of that do you all weigh into where they fall on your board?
What makes them tick and their why is a really important component of understanding the person, and you always want to know that. I think it's a part of the puzzle, certainly, and it's important to us, especially for what we stand for and what we believe in. But it's just a part of the puzzle, and as long as they're good people, good teammates, great competitors, and what everybody's going to have a different why, and they're all pretty special. So it's cool to know that, and cool to understand that, and really tap into that. But I think it is just part of the puzzle.
Outside of the talent standpoint for Josh, the fact that he went up against some really good players in the Big Ten, Abdul Carter being one, how did that help in your evaluation of him?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something I failed to mention when I started the presser, but I think one, the way he competed against Abdul Carter, he went toe to toe with Abdul Carter, who's the best pass rusher in the draft. He did really well, and he did really well against a lot of really good players. He, played at Ohio State twice, and they were getting break speed off in the second game, and he was still competing to the very last second, and that showed a lot. And just so those types of things you see, and when we have metrics where our R&D department does a great job of giving us metrics, how do they perform against high draftable players? And so he performed really high against high draftable players, and that lined up with what our eyes saw. And so those things make you really, not just his skill, but the fact that he will go toe-to-toe with those guys. He's not going to freak out. He's not going to panic. He's not going to do things that he doesn't normally do when he's face-to-face with a really great player.
Hi, Adam. We saw on paper as far as all the things that Josh does, the pluses and all of that, and you talked a little bit about talking to him at the Senior Bowl and at the Combines. But what are some of the tangibles that we don't know about him that's not on paper?
In terms of is on the field or just
on the field, or him just as the person that really resonated with you all when you talked to him?
Yeah, I think is really just one is his maturity. When you're sitting in a room with him, he's got this quiet confidence about him, and he's got a baby face because he's still really young, but he's really mature. He's really thoughtful, and then you hear about how much of a pro he is already in terms of how routine oriented he is. One of the hardest workers, if not the hardest worker on the team, and all those different things. How smart he is, how bright he is learning football. So all those things together, and you really just when everybody gets that great vibe for him, it really makes you feel confident to make the pick.
All right, thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you guys.